So I'm currently replaying the Mass Effect trilogy to grab the plats, and I'm smack dab in the middle of this chef's kiss of a trilogy. Playing Mass Effect 2 again is reminding me all over why it's my favorite game of all time, and if I'm being honest, it's not even that close. I am constantly thinking about why though. There's something about this game that helps it stand out not only above the other games in the trilogy, but also above some friggin' juggernauts of the gaming world. Now, while I'm grinding away on some of the less favorable areas of the games, I'm also listening to YouTube or something else in the background, and I overheard some movie news that directly relates to something that I think makes Mass Effect 2 so great. And that news I overheard was about the recent success of Inside Out 2. Apparently it's in the top 25 in box office sales of movies ever, which is some pretty insane company to have when you think about it. Now, I haven't seen the original, and because I'm old and I don't have any kids, I really have no plans of seeing it anytime soon. However, I began wondering, what is it that would drive people to see this sequel? Is there something unique about the part 2 of a franchise that helps propel them? Or maybe being in the middle can actually be a hindrance, a cornered position of expectation and realistic storytelling possibilities? So I went on a sequel soul-searching journey in an attempt to find what it is that makes a sequel successful. First, I wanted to find out what the reason was for even creating sequels. The obvious answer was almost always money, but I wanted to look beyond that and find what it is that drives people to or away from sequels. And I feel like I found enough to keep me pondering for a while at least. My very first thought was what sticks out most to me about Inside Out, without me knowing anything about it, and that's the characters. They fit the mold for cutesy, child-friendly design that can draw emotions in adult audiences with their story or themes. And I mean, let's be honest, this isn't even the first time that Pixar has had success with this formula. And video game mascots further prove that having a recognizable character in media can definitely drive an audience to your project, more than likely because people want to see how their favorite character has learned or evolved. I would even go as far as making the argument that having a repeat personality can make a project altogether. With that in mind, let's look at Han Solo and Chewie in The Force Awakens. Now, I'm not saying that this film is bad, I actually liked it a lot, and it probably would have done well given how long it had been since fans received a mainline movie. But there's no denying that the same idea of having recognizable or likable characters to boost a project, which definitely happened in this case, considering each subsequent title drew more resentment and considerably less box office success, showing that the characters can give it, but they can also lead to its decline. But hey, Rey and Finn are extremely divisive, so let's look at some characters who are definitely more loved. Crash Banooka is a gaming icon, and my own personal favorite Sony mascot, and helped boost Naughty Dog, who we will talk about more later, to gaming god status. The character's goofy demeanor but ability to succeed and overcome cemented him as a sort of modern-day Bugs Bunny character. However, once we moved away from the raging success of the first 3 titles, he definitely lost some appeal. And one of the major aspects about the character that changed was his appearance. In fact, in 2007's Crash of the Titans, nearly the entire cast got a complete facelift. Now honestly, I don't think they're too bad, maybe a bit edgy, but regardless, the appeal dropped off, and it wasn't until they decided to reboot the continuity with Crash 4 that fans were finally able to chomp down on some stellar Wampa fruit. And wouldn't you know, they returned Crash back to his original design. And stop right now, because I can hear you saying, Tony, that's not a real sequel, but what loved characters changed so much from one game to another, huh? And don't worry, I wrote up this entire argument with those thoughts in mind. So let's look at another Naughty Dog owned IP and see that a very similar thing happened with widely differing results. Jak and Daxter, the precursor legacy, came out and presented another strong, stoic, silent, and more importantly, likable character that would go on to save the day and work his way into the hearts of fans. I mean, I personally played this game with my sister when we were kids, well over 5 times to completion. And then Jak 2 came out, and boy oh boy did he grow up. I want to say that Jack aged generations during his developmental break and emerged in the sequel as a dark and brooding protagonist in a game that is debatably the greatest in the trilogy. Okay. I hear you. We are indeed talking about characters, but we're not talking about their character. And I totally agree. Let's be real. The reason most Pixar characters work so well is the characteristics that we are introduced to them with always seem to be the same in the sequels. And I would say that's mostly true for the two PlayStation mascots. Most times, these movies or games need only to introduce another character into the mix that clashes with the established group, and most times they can just keep telling the same or a similar story over and over. I mean, Buzz and Woody always find a way to put their brains together and save the day, Woody adding the heart and Buzz the brawn. And admittedly, Crash and Jack keep enough of their naive goofiness, or at least the ensemble cast does, to ensure that even through the little changes, they are still the same person underneath. And I think the best example of this in all of film is probably Jack Sparrow. He's such a unique and well-written character, the goofy hero who gets close enough to failing that you as an audience almost lose hope in him, before all the quirky things he did previously line up in order for him to be the hero, or at least a major contributor to the solution. And that's why when he's not the centerpiece, or his character is not written in order to account for his characteristics, the sequels typically fail. Now, how often does this really happen? Unfortunately, it's a lot more often than you would hope for. I think Indiana Jones may be the most recent example, but it happens everywhere. My wife and I went to go see Harry Potter and the Cursed Child a while back, a Broadway show whose sole purpose was to cash in on character nostalgia, and whose writing absolutely obliterates the titular character. From the boy who lived, to the hero of the wizarding world, to the absolute worst father ever. Now, I'm not naive, and I understand that if he's as good at parenting as he is at, well, pretty much everything else, there would be no drama. But destroying an established character for the sake of story, or in this case, attempted appeal to a modern audience, may be one of the worst sins that a writer can commit. Not convinced by either of those two? Let's take a brief look at The Last of Us and its sequel, as it cements the point I'm trying to make now, and it's going to help me segue into my next point. The Last of Us 1 was absolute perfection. Characters and their motivations are laid out plainly and perfectly. Each person reacts to situations how you think they would, and when the end comes and you think that Joel is going to have a change of character for the sake of humanity, you find out that you're dead wrong in the best way possible. Joel is selfish, he hates the world around him, and only wants to protect the family that he has left. Screw everybody else. Then there's The Last of Us 2. And I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but the motivations, the interactions, and the development of character is all over the place in this sequel. The characters who are meant to bring in the masses are extremely flawed. They lack proper actions to establish motives, and they react and change behaviors on the drop of a dime. However, what I feel is the greatest kink in this motor is the fact that The Last of Us 2 is a sequel that had no, or at the very least the most minute reason for existing. So how in the world can we establish a sequel's reason for existing? Another very simple answer is that it was established prior to being created. The Two Towers exists as a Fellowship of the Ring sequel because the conflict wasn't resolved in the first book or movie. Same thing with all the other obvious examples. In Harry Potter, well, Voldy is still alive. In God of War, Zeus is still alive. And while those two are very strong, let's look at some slightly weaker yet still believable examples, like the Winter Soldier, which is still the GOAT of the MCU, by the way. The first Captain America helped create or establish the character in the MCU, and they had not yet found all of the stones or confronted Thanos. So is it believable or understandable that a sequel could exist? Well, yeah, obviously. And this film specifically is helped by the first argument of characters. Bucky makes a return in a way that conflicts with Steve's character and motivations. Hydra has infiltrated and made a fool of an establishment that is meant to protect. And all of that culminates in a sequel that has a valid reason for existing and has the character firepower to become the greatest MCU sequel, and rivals The Dark Knight alone in terms of superhero sequels. And it does all of this without being clearly established prior to or in the first title. Okay, so let's now tear down the idea of established characters and reason, because evidently you don't need either of those. Cloverfield was a 2008 film that crossed genres between a monster and a found footage film. Unique and charming enough to do some numbers and have a pretty mixed reaction from audiences. Now, a film like this is cult classic-y enough that it probably could have done something similar and had a sequel with another monster. And did they do that? Well, technically yes, but it's a film that had zero reason, expectation, or planning when the original was released. 10 Cloverfield Lane introduces new characters struggling through a plot that is wholly independent from the world that Cloverfield created for about 90% of its runtime. Meaning this story didn't need to exist and had no characters for fans to purposely come back for, a whole lot like The Last of Us 2. However, this shift into a psychological horror film knocks it out of the park in my opinion, and it's one of the greatest sequels ever made. So what does it all mean? Well, I'll be honest, I really don't know. But all of this thought has culminated within my noggin, and all of it mixing in there has led to my thoughts on what makes a great sequel. And writing it all down has given me the excuse to speak about what I feel are the two greatest sequels of all time, Mass Effect 2 and Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I wanted to speak about a movie and a game because they are both amazing pieces of media. And while they differ wildly in their delivery, or I guess more clearly, how you experience each is vastly different, what they offer is what I feel is the glue that holds all of the elements that we've spoken about so far together. Now, while they both have or use some of the aspects that we've spoken about, the main thing that elevates these sequels is their narratives, storylines that possess proper motivations, thrills, plot twists, and beginnings and endings that all exist in a vacuum. Allow me to explain. The storylines for Mass Effect 2 and Terminator 2 are ultimately pointless. Terminator 1 ends in such a way that the inevitable nature of Skynet's failure, the rise of the machines, is hinted at. And the cyclical nature of John's fight for humanity is given life. A life that will never die. A life of constant fighting against a future that will arrive eventually. So from the second that Arnold goes back again, to his lava bath that is meant to secure humanity's safety, every moment of this film is rendered pointless with the arrival of the third film. Well, almost every moment. While it has an epic sounding aura to it, how can a story that doesn't even need to exist be the greatest movie sequel of all time? Well, first, let's look at the game. In a similar fashion, there is a sense of inevitability in Mass Effect 2. Shepard saved the galaxy come the end of the first game, and the idea is that he plans to immediately begin searching for a way to stop the impending Reaper invasion. Now, this actually lends itself into the idea of a sequel a lot better than the first Terminator film did. However, I feel this could have been a huge fault if not handled correctly. Shepard exists in the sequels in much the same way John Connor does, a vessel meant to save humanity, or the entire galaxy in this instance. However, knowing that regardless of the outcome of your successes, the Reaper invasion still happens, and the existence of all life will be threatened, how can I stand up and state that this story stands above all other video game sequels? Well, the greatest strength for both of these examples is the story that they tell, and the morals or lessons that they teach and instill in the face of their meaninglessness through their characters. John Connor and the T-800 ultimately work together in an effort to postpone Judgment Day by destroying any remnants of the Cyberdyne technology. However, throughout their journey, John and the Terminator become the unthinkable. In the aforementioned inevitable outcome of war between man and machine, they become friends. A metal skeleton covered in rather attractive skin begins to learn what it means to be human, and ultimately sacrifices itself in order to aid humanity against the machines. John, a boy who is out of time and is dealing with issues of abandonment and the weight of his importance to the future, finds a father and proves that he has what it takes to be a leader. And ultimately, the action-packed escapades, willed with gunfire and explosives, find a way to bring a lighthearted tone and instill a sense of hope for the future. It promotes the idea that if a thoughtless creation fueled by destruction can befriend us, maybe there will come a time when we too can set aside our differences and do the same. Now, it feels like it's going to be hard to top that, but I sure hope I can, because as much as I absolutely love Terminator 2, Mass Effect 2 is my favorite game of all time and my favorite narrative piece. The RPG aspects and gameplay improvements aside, which are both present and both great, in a series that is one of the most innovative ever and has done something that no other series has even come close to replicating, the sequel exists in such a weird purgatory. Shepard successfully postponed the Reaper invasion, and we know that at one point they will be the endgame, meaning that they're definitely not going to be the central point of this game. So what did BioWare do in order to satisfy the fans of the series and fill 30 to 100 hours of gameplay? They created the highest stakes they possibly could in a series reset that saw old friends returning, new, unique, exciting, and altogether bizarre characters, all from the wide selection of alien races. Shepard is confronted in the opening cutscene by the Collectors, a race of slave-like creatures whose goal is to aid in the Reaper invasion and who serve as the main antagonist of this game. They destroy Shepard's ship and kill him, and the subsequent 2-year window sees a human extremist group, Cerberus, from the first game utilize every possible resource in order to ensure that he can be brought back, sowing the seeds early on that all humanity ever really needed was itself, and we are going to be the ones that look out for us. With so much time having passed, Shepard needs to form a new crew, whose goal will be to enter the Omega-4 relay, a transfer beacon that hasn't seen anyone return, in order to stop whatever it is that the Collectors are doing. So essentially, you're going around gathering a whole bunch of friends, mercs, and assassins in order to complete a suicide run in uncharted space. Your actions, the relationships you form with your crew, and the more you do to prepare, all impact your success or failure. And the greatest part about this, and what makes the game superior to the film in my opinion, is that the game lets you fail. Every member of your crew, including Shepard, can perish. The game lets you make the decisions, and the team you build is a direct reflection of your leadership. Shepard constantly goes against what Cerberus deems as the best for humanity. The missions you complete see you tackle all topics from family, betrayal, death, redemption, and self-actualization. Honestly, there's just so much that you're able to go through in this game that it would take a full retrospective video just to scratch the surface. However, the long and short is extremely similar to T2 in the sense that, in a game that could have phoned it in for the third game in the trilogy, the storyline instead instills the core values of leadership, hope, and determination, while also having the final boss and the ever-looming presence of Cerberus once again foreshadow and symbolize the thought that humanity has always been and will probably always be our greatest enemy. Now, I could probably go on about each of these sequels ad nausea. However, they also utilize a lot of the concepts that we already spoke about. Established characters returning, which both play with the idea of having Arnold come back as the good guy, and the new crew sprinkled in with returning faces. Both also sort of exist in a timeline that has some sort of established endpoint, but they dominate within the rule set that they find themselves in. And I guess, most importantly, both made a lot of money. I want to thank you so much for sitting through this weird deconstruction of sequels, and whatever they are, and whatever makes them great. Characters, narratives, and reason are all really great words and fun topics to talk about, but without someone to share them with, they can sort of lose their purpose. So please, go and share with everyone. Talk about the things that you like or love. I make a lot of videos about games, and commentary videos about whatever strikes my fancy at the time. And if you don't have too many of those already bogging you down, I would really appreciate a subscription more than you know. If not, a like or comment helps push this video to others. Regardless of all that fun YouTube stuff, I do sincerely want to thank you again for stopping and watching this, and maybe I'll see you in the sequel. Until then, be safe.